The glass under my boots cracked the moment the tray chimed, and every head in that hall turned toward the sound like predators catching a scent. I did not know yet that a single chime could end a life socially, but I was about to learn it in front of 300 strangers who were not human. My name is Daniel Ashford, and I was standing in a corner of the great hall holding a drink I was not allowed to finish, because the real ambassador had food poisoning, and someone from my station had to fill the empty chair. I was not important. I was not supposed to matter that night. That changed in about 4 seconds. The Great Hall belonged to the Vesipine Compact, a group of powerful star systems that treated status the way we treat oxygen, something everyone needed and nobody wanted to admit they were fighting over. The ceiling above us was built to look like open space, full of false stars, and the floor was black glass polished so well that every guest could see themselves twice, once walking forward and once reflected walking away. It was a room built for people who liked being looked at. That is what made the moment so sharp. Because across the floor, a young alien girl had just been looked at, and then, on purpose, by every noble near her, she had been looked away from. Her name was Ithra. I did not know that yet either. All I knew was that she was smaller than the towering nobles around her, pale at the joints in a way that meant she was young for her kind, and she was wearing a plain gray sash that marked her as low caste. She had reached for a drink from a floating serving tray, the wrong tray, meant for guests of a different rank, and the tray had chimed to signal the mistake. Then something happened that I had never seen before and hoped never to see again. The nobles near her turned away, not with anger, not with shouting, just quiet, deliberate turning, chairs rotating, conversations shifting to exclude her, a servant drone gliding past her outstretched hand as if she were part of the furniture. Her hand stayed frozen in the air, reaching for a drink that no longer existed for her. I understood then that this was not rudeness. This was punishment. Among the Vesipine, being seen and then deliberately unseen was a verdict, a sentence passed without a single word spoken. It told everyone in the room, including her, that she did not matter enough to exist in their eyes. I had read the briefing papers before the gala, 17 pages telling me not to interfere in compact caste customs under any condition. I remembered none of that in the moment it counted. What I remembered instead was my younger sister standing alone at a school dance years ago, arms crossed, pretending she did not care that nobody had asked her to dance. I remembered the exact shape of that loneliness, and I could not stand to watch it happen again in front of me, even if the person feeling it had 4 more feet of height and skin made of something closer to armor than flesh. So I put my drink down on the nearest table and walked across that black glass floor. I picked the serving tray out of the drone's grip myself, which I later learned was also against etiquette, though nobody had thought to write that rule down for a human before. I held the tray out toward Ithra. She stared at me the way you might stare at a machine that had started speaking a new language halfway through a sentence. I told her the gray label was probably the good stuff anyway, and that the nobles just did not want the rest of the room finding that out. It was not a clever joke. It was the only thing I could think to say that might make her feel like a person again instead of a mistake standing in the open. She answered carefully, in the formal trade language everyone used at these events, telling me I was not permitted to address her, that she was unseen. I told her the room seemed to be doing a poor job of that, since I could see her just fine, and that I did not plan on joining in. I felt the silence in the room change before I heard it change. A silence has a texture. When 300 beings who had been pretending not to listen, suddenly all listen at once, you feel it crawl up the back of your neck before a single word gets spoken. The head of the girl's house crossed the floor toward us. Her name, I would learn later, was Lady Vesa Seneral, matron of the family that had taken Ithra in as a ward, supposedly to educate her by exposing her to what they called her betters. She moved like a tide, pulling back and then slamming forward the wrong way, robes the color of deep violet marking her as the oldest and highest caste in the room. She looked at me the way someone looks at a stain that has just started talking back. She called me ambassador, though I was not one, and told me I misunderstood their customs. She said the ward had committed an offense, and that she was simply being corrected, that the correction was social and not physical, meant to teach humility. I told her that from where I stood, it looked like a room full of grown and powerful adults ignoring a child, until she felt small enough to disappear. Someone near us made a strange choking sound, something between a laugh and outrage that had nowhere else to go. Lady Seneral's plating shifted color, deepening the way skin flushes with anger, though on her it looked more like weather changing across armor. She told me I was a guest of limited standing in a hall far older than my species' written history, and that I should remember my place. I have heard that sentence before, in different clothing, back on Earth. Bosses have said it. Governments have said it to smaller nations. Humans as a whole tend to respond badly to being told to remember our place, mostly because history keeps proving that our place is wherever we decide to stand, and we tend to stand exactly where we are needed. I told her I knew exactly where I was standing, right next to the girl she had decided did not matter, and that I was not going anywhere. I turned back to Ithra. Her hand was still half raised in the air, forgotten in the middle of the confrontation, as if she did not know whether she was still allowed to want the drink at all. I placed the tray firmly into her hands and closed her fingers around it myself. I told her the gray label really was the good stuff that I had checked. She did not drink it right away. She just held it, staring at me as though I had become a variable in an equation that used to make perfect sense before I arrived. She asked me why, without any of the layers of polite formality the language usually demanded. Just one plain word. I told her the truth. I said that somewhere along the way, this room had decided she was not allowed to be seen today, and I figured someone needed to remind that room that it did not get to make that decision alone. Lady Seneral was still standing there, her plating gone the deep color of a fresh bruise, and every noble who had turned their chairs away now turned them back, not out of sympathy, but out of the same instinct that makes people slow down to look at a wreck on the side of a road. They wanted to see how this would end. She told me this would be reported, that my government would hear of my conduct. I told her that was fine by me, that she should report exactly what happened, word for word. Tell them a human noticed a child being frozen out of a room by people 4 times her size, and decided that was not a tradition worth respecting. I told her I would sign my own name to that report if it helped. I turned to Ithra one last time before the aides descended to manage whatever needed managing after an incident like that. I told her, quietly now, since the audience no longer mattered, that she was allowed to be thirsty, and she was allowed to be seen, and that if anyone ever told her otherwise again, she should come find the human standing in the corner holding a drink he was not permitted to finish, because we were good at this particular kind of problem. I did not find out what happened politically after that night, whether there were consequences for Lady Seneral, whether some clause buried deep in a treaty got quietly invoked, whether she ever forgave the insult of being contradicted by a lesser species in front of her peers. I was reassigned to a different station before the dust settled, moved along like paperwork, the way most of these small incidents tend to disappear from official memory. But 6 months later, a message reached me, routed through 4 separate relay stations, written carefully in improving trade language, no title attached, no station listed, just a short note, signed with a single name. It said she had finally tried the gray label, and that it truly was the good stuff, and thanked me for telling her she was allowed to be thirsty. I never learned what the compact called that night in their official records, whether it became listed as an incident, an insult, or simply a footnote nobody wanted to revisit. I did not care much either way. Where I come from, we have a much simpler word for what happened that night. We just call it decent. Some months after that message reached me, I found myself back near compact space, this time on a supply run rather than a diplomatic assignment. My uniform swapped for a plain work jacket, and my schedule finally my own for a few days. I had not expected to hear anything more about Ithra. Political incidents like the one at the gala tend to vanish quietly, filed away by people who prefer forgetting to explaining. That is why the message waiting for me at the docking station surprised me so much. It came from a courier ship registered to House Seneral, the very family whose matron had told me to remember my place. My first instinct was worry. I assumed it might be some kind of formal complaint finally catching up with me, months late, dressed up in polite diplomatic language before landing a real consequence. Instead, the message asked for a meeting, not with Lady Seneral, with Ithra herself. I met her in a small public garden near the docking ring, one of those quiet green spaces built into space stations to remind travelers of a planet somewhere. She had grown taller since the gala, though still young by her species standard, and her plating had darkened slightly at the joints, moving past that pale, unfinished look toward something steadier. She greeted me properly this time, using my name instead of a title, which I later learned was a small but meaningful shift in her culture, a sign that she now considered me someone worth greeting as an equal, rather than a passing curiosity. She told me that after the gala, something had shifted within her own house. Not everything, not overnight, but enough. A few of the younger nobles, embarrassed by what they had witnessed, had begun quietly pushing back against some of the older caste traditions. Nothing dramatic, she said. No public reform, no grand announcement, just small changes. A few more voices willing to speak up when someone else got frozen out of a room the way she had been. She told me Lady Seneral had never apologized. Not directly, not in so many words. But the matron had also never again allowed another underclass ward to be publicly corrected in front of a gathering. at least not while Ithra remained under her roof. Whether that came from shame or simple caution, Ithra could not say for certain, and honestly, she said she no longer cared which one it was. I asked her what she wanted to do next, now that she was older and clearly no longer the quiet, frozen girl from that night. She told me she wanted to study interspecies law, something almost unheard of for someone of her caste, and that she wanted to eventually represent lower caste wards like herself in disputes with noble houses. She said humans had a strange habit of standing where they were not wanted, and somehow making that stand mean something, and she wanted to learn how to do that within her own system, using words and law instead of just presence. I told her that sounded like exactly the kind of trouble worth causing. She laughed, a strange, layered sound I had never heard from her kind before, somewhere between a chime and a low hum, and told me that was precisely what Lady Ceneral had said about me after the gala, though not nearly as kindly. We talked for a while longer in that quiet garden, about nothing important, about food, about the strange stars visible through the station's viewport, about how different our two species were, and how oddly similar the ache of being ignored seemed to feel across all that distance. It struck me, sitting there, that maybe the biggest difference between humans and the compact was not power or technology or height. It was simply a willingness to notice someone standing alone and choose, without needing permission, to walk over and stand there too. Before I left the station, she gave me something small, a polished piece of the same pale material her plating was made from when she was young, worn smooth like a stone from a riverbed. She told me her people sometimes kept pieces of their old selves as reminders of who they used to be before they changed. She said she wanted me to have one, so that whenever I doubted whether one person standing in the right place at the right moment actually mattered, I could hold it and remember that it did. I still carry it, tucked into a pocket of my uniform, a small pale stone from a species I barely understood on the night I first met her, now carried as proof that sometimes the smallest choice, made quickly, without permission, without preparation, can quietly change the direction of an entire life, and maybe, in small pieces, the direction of an entire system too. I do not know if history will remember that night at the gala. Most nights like that disappear into old records nobody bothers to read again, but I know Ithra remembers it, and I know I remember it, and somewhere out there, in a house full of nobles who once decided a child did not deserve to be seen, a few more voices are speaking up now than there used to be. That is enough for me. It was never about winning an argument in a crowded hall, or embarrassing a powerful woman in front of her peers, or proving a point about human values to an audience of strangers who did not ask for the lesson. It was about a single hand, frozen in midair, reaching for something as small as a drink, and a room full of powerful people deciding that reach did not matter. I decided otherwise. That is all it ever really was. Somewhere across the stars tonight, in a hall built for people who like being looked at, there is probably another quiet corner holding another overlooked guest, another chime signaling another small mistake, another room ready to turn away all at once like a practiced performance. I cannot be in every one of those rooms. No one person can. But I like to think that somewhere in that same room, someone else, human or not, is watching the way I once watched, feeling that same old ache rise up from some memory of their own. A sister at a dance, a friend left out, a moment nobody stepped in to fix. And I like to think that this time, they will not wait for permission either. They will simply put their drink down, walk across the floor, and stand where they are needed. That, more than anything else that happened that night, is the real ending to this story. Not the girl who was frozen out, and not the woman who told me to remember my place, but the quiet chance that someone else, somewhere, learns from this small moment that standing beside a stranger costs nothing, and sometimes means everything. I finished my drink that night, eventually, once the gala had moved on to pretending nothing unusual had happened at all. It tasted the same as it had before, burnt sugar and something sharp underneath, but it felt different going down, lighter somehow, like a weight I had not noticed carrying had finally been set aside. I do not know what the compact will remember about that gala 100 years from now. I do not know if Ithra will become the lawyer she hopes to be, or whether House Ceneral will ever fully change its old ways. I only know what I remember, clearly, without any doubt. A hand raised in the air, reaching for something small. A room deciding, together, that the reach did not matter. And one person deciding, just as quickly, that it did.